Oh, John Shipton, thanks so much for being here, John. And you have to speak in it right there.
Thank you, everybody, for a warm welcome. Where to start with this? It's Universal Human Rights Day today. That's us. Universal Human Rights Day. In 1948, an Australian, Herbert Vere Evatt, in company with Eleanor Roosevelt, established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the United Nations. He was also first president of the United Nations. An Australian established what we today celebrate all throughout the world as people. Herbert Vere Evatt, keep that name in mind. In 1973, Australia presented under the Whitlam government to the United Nations General Assembly the Conventions of Asylum, knowing, as we do, that occasionally states get out of hand and people have to seek asylum in one place or another away from their tormentors or oppressors. It was accepted with only 16 abstentions. So Australia established the Universal Declaration of Human Rights with Herbert Vere Evatt, 1948, constructed the United Nations under Herbert Vere Evatt, the first president, and in 1973 established in the United Nations, embraced in the laws of the United Nations, the Conventions of Asylum, much to our credit. In 2010, Julian Assange released at the Washington Press Gallery Collateral Murder, which shows 2 war crimes, and then progressively released the Iraq war files, 400,000 of them, the Afghan war logs, 95,000, and the cables, the diplomatic cables, 250,000 of those cables, the Guantanamo Bay files. Each of those brought great benefits to all people throughout the world, enabling us to understand the illegal war, the destruction of Iraq, the conditions people were held as prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. David Hicks was held there for 5 years. A great Australian lawyer, Stephen Kenny of Adelaide, represented David Hicks, travelled to Guantanamo Bay and used the Guantanamo Bay files to bring justice to David Hicks. The Chagos Islands. Chagos Islanders were all packed up by the United Kingdom and sent to Mauritius. All of them, every single one, and they shot their dogs. Handed over Diego Garcia to the United States as a B-52 bomber airbase. Using the cables, the diplomatic cables, the Chagos Islanders and their lawyers took a case to the International Court of Justice, and using those files, they prevailed. Next one. 2008, a group of American soldiers outside Baghdad burst into a family's home and murdered all of the occupants in a spasm of violence. When I say all of the occupants, they are people, their mum and the dad, the babies, the boys and the girls, the grandfathers and uncles and aunties, all of them, faced with this heinous crime, this vile crime, they called in an airstrike and obliterated from the earth all trace of that family and that house. That was written up in one of the cables by the United States ambassador to Baghdad, to Iraq, and sent to the Department of Justice. As a consequence of that, when released by WikiLeaks, that cable was read by all of the parliamentarians in Iraq, the people of Iraq, and somehow that ruined nation, that destroyed nation, shock and awe, you might remember it, you gathered together its courage, gathered together its courage, and said to the United States and its allies, and to my shame, one of those is a place called Australia, we are not signing the Status of Forces Agreement. You will have to remove your troops from Iraq, which was done. A leak published by WikiLeaks, brought about by Chelsea Manning, brought three things: justice to those in Guantanamo Bay, some justice to the Chagos Islanders, and brought an end to a war. That is the quality of an Australian, Julian Assange, who joins with the other Australians that we've so easily forgotten or are now part of history. Gough Whitlam and Herbert Bear-Evett and Julian Assange. Lastly, it's Human Rights Day, and I'd like to acknowledge the courage that the locals here in Lismore. I have a friend who has a house or that has a business on the ground floor down the road, and his building was flooded and destroyed. His sister-in-law asked to go and inspect the building, did so in a canoe, which she went through the second floor window to have a look inside. So I have reports of the courage and fortitude of the people of Lismore, for which I offer my congratulations and sympathy. So your support for Julian, thanks. But always to keep in mind that it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was put together by Australia, instituted and embraced in the United Nations by Australia, and the first president and structure of the United Nations was contributed to primarily by Australians. Thanks, everybody.
Free Julian Assange. Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! How many years is he now there in terror after being in the embassy for, was it 7, 8, 9? And then in jail now, in one of the most horrible jails in England, right there, through the COVID and everything. Unbelievable. And he's still there, and he's still our man. Thank you. Thanks so much for John Shipton being here. What an honor for us having him here speaking. Thanks so much, and good luck for all what's coming. But it looks like there's a bit more movement, not just the Labour Party finally remembering that there was some Australian somewhere before we sign and buy the next lot of military weapons and throw all that money we need here to be protected into the next generation of war games for the next 20, 30 years when the boats, the submarines will maybe arrive. But
but let's not dwell on that. I got a quote here or two maybe before I put the next speaker on. And it says here, to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. This is by Nelson Mandela. The other one I picked up was a right delayed is a right denied, from Martin Luther King.